when I saw it, something happened. And like, I don't really remember like the in between, but I was suddenly on the floor and I was on my knees and I was crying, and it felt like it felt like a fire hose of light was just pouring into my heart.
All right, welcome to Simply Always Awake. We do all kinds of things here. One of the things we do is we do interviews with people who have had some experience along the awakening journey and so forth. So today I have a new friend that I met recently. We're going to have I'm sure, stimulating, interesting conversation about awakening, realization, and so forth. Her name is Holly Denman. Hello, Holly.
Hi, Angelo. It's good to be
Thanks
here.
for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, maybe just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, wherever that makes sense for you to start, or whatever you want to say.
Oh, okay. Um, I where should I begin?
Well, maybe
It's always a strange place to start from,
it is.
coming from a place
I
of
like to answer.
awakening.
I like to ask the open-ended questions because I never know. I don't want to leave anything out, but maybe just tell us kind of like where you grew up and what things were like growing up for you.
Sure. Okay. Um, mm. Well, I grew up in East Tennessee, and a small town outside of Knoxville. And mm, it was kind of rural, like bordering on a suburban area. And I had hippie parents. We grew a lot of our own food. We were definitely different in a lot of ways to the sort of common culture there, which it's the Bible Belt. So for those who aren't familiar with the Bible Belt, it's there's you have your like Baptists and some more Baptists and some more Baptists and maybe a Methodist here or there and like a lot more of that, and it's just very, very Christian. And my family was very different. My parents were, well, actually, I should say, in a lot of ways, this was a gift. It was hard for me to be really different. It was hard to find a place and feel like I belonged anywhere. But at the same time, they said to me when I was very young, I believe this way, they believe this way, we can't agree, so we're not going to push our beliefs on you. Unlike, I think, a lot of kids, when you're really young and you kind of want to concrete how things are in the universe, my parents didn't actually give that to me. They said, we don't know. Here's what we think. But, you got to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
I was very curious, and at a very, very young age, I was contemplating the nature of the universe and reality and self and God and what is there, and not having any answer for it. And
how did that play out? Was it like asking yourself questions or asking your parents questions, or did you actually like try to research through books, or how did you go about that?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, completely. All of the things. I would sit and I would ask and I would kind of observe reality and wonder. I remember, my father would take me up onto the roof of the house. There was like a nice, like lowly sloped roof. We could get up there and look at the stars and, like tell me about Einstein's theory of relativity and point out galaxies far away and like put in perspective how small I was in comparison to the world and the universe and whatever is. And so, I looked I looked in science, I looked in religion, because my parents were very open about that. They,
Hmm.
they shared their versions of spirituality with me. My mom was meditating at the time when I was really young. She was a member of the Self-Realization Fellowship. So she was, she was getting these mail order lessons from Paramahansa Yogananda, and in them were a lot of really amazing, like kind of fables that were really appropriate for children. So these were kind of bedtime stories for me, but they're spiritually profound.
Hmm.
So I and she was my mom. And so, as little kids do follow their parents around and mimic everything that they do. When she would sit and meditate and like move, she had these little beads. I remember she would move them along the string with each breath and count her breaths. And I would sit next to her and count my breaths with her and watch the beads. And
Oh,
so she taught me to be still and present. Um, and that impacted me a lot. I used that sort of through my life.
wow. Very
Uh,
cool. I mean, how auspicious is that to have a parent that is that, I guess, well, sometimes think like just people I meet, like grown adults I meet, and how solidified their beliefs are around religion. That
mhm.
like it's not just about religion; it's about belief itself. Like there's an addiction to belief and like tribal belief, patterns and so forth, and it's so rigid. And I didn't grow up in a household where that was put upon me, so to speak. But I can imagine how solid that would be for some people, and it really just shapes the way you experience everything. But to grow up with parents who say, like, you should investigate what you actually believe and look into it. And we don't want to, you know, coerce you to believe this or that. I think that's amazing. And then on top of it, actually having practice, some sort of meditative practice with someone who you feel safe around. Very cool. A parent.
Yeah, I was really lucky in that way, but it was also very sort of difficult socially. It was compartmentalized from the rest of my life. I
Mhm.
needed belonging, like we all need to belong and feel safe in a community. And
So
so,
meditating with hippies wasn't like a popular thing in Eastern Tennessee among your school colleagues there.
yeah, not so much. I mean, there were some conversations I had that were literally started with the very first thing of, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And I didn't know the right answer to that question. So
Yeah.
oftentimes it ended well for me. I was I was not socially accepted very quickly, and
Mhm.
people said, "You're going to hell."
Mhm.
And that was it. I also was very open, though, and curious to understand or gain wisdom wherever I could.
Mhm.
So I went to a lot of churches with neighbors and anybody who wanted to take me. Like, if anybody actually offered to take me to their church, I would go.
Mhm.
So I, and that was a really unique perspective. I guess not a lot of people just go on church tours,
Mhm.
like to all these different churches to see what that's like.
What was it
Um,
like for you to go to
well,
these different?
well, there were really beautiful, teachings about loving your neighbor, and Jesus is really cool. I really liked all of that, and and I had a very sweet neighbor who gave me my first Bible, and I really enjoyed some of the pieces of that. But there was also, it was a weirdness. It was kind of like an ownership. The churches were trying to recruit me and kind of control me, is what it felt like. So uh, it was it was strange to me to go to all these different churches and see, like, okay, they're all the same denomination, so to speak. They
Mhm.
should be the same kind of on the same team, is how I thought of it. But um, I would get saved. I'd go through this process of being saved. And then I'd go to the next church, and inevitably they would pull me aside and ask me if I had been saved. And I'd say, yeah, yeah, totally. And they'd say, oh, tell us about it. So I go through this kind of step-by-step explanation of what happened. And inevitably they would stop me and say, hold on. we're sorry. We're sorry. Like they didn't do it right, but don't worry. We've got you. Your soul is safe with us.
Right.
So let's just do it one more time. We'll make
Yeah.
sure you're good, and then
Yeah.
you'll be saved and you're going to heaven for sure. It's cool.
Well, from the standpoint of game theory and like statistics, you probably did it the right way, right? Because if you want to be saved, and you believe that that's the way to do it is to say what Martin Luther said, which is like, accept Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, just do it with multiple churches to cover all your bases, right? Like, I think that makes really a lot of sense.
Yeah, so yeah, just covering the bases. I've been saved a
Yeah.
lot of times.
You're very safe.
Just in case. Very, very safe.
Whatever the afterlife looks like, you're heading there. I can relate to what you said about going to churches because as I grew up, my parents were, well, actually, before I was old enough to remember, they did go to Catholic church because my father's Italian and Catholic by tradition, though I don't think he ever really had any strong beliefs around it. But my older sisters remember going to like Catholic church and stuff. But when I don't remember it at all. And by the time I was 4, my parents were divorced and so forth. So my parents didn't talk about religion. They didn't pray that I ever saw. None of that stuff happened. So I didn't have a context for it. But on occasion, I would either meet a friend who was like, hey, you want to go to church with us on Sunday? Or I'd stay the night at their house and we would go. It happened a few times. And then occasionally someone would walk up to me with a flyer and be like, have you accepted Jesus Christ? It always felt weird to me. It felt like what you described as like they're trying to recruit you or something. Like I could feel someone trying to persuade me into a view. And it just felt off to me. I didn't really get it. But I do remember going to church a few times and I don't know. I think I had mixed feelings. Like there was something kind of cool about the communal nature of it, but also I could just feel that it was like everybody saying things a certain way. They know what to say. It felt like, I don't know about coerced, but it just felt programmed somehow. I don't know. And so as a kid, I didn't have a strong resonation with church specifically. But anyway, I just thought I would reflect that,
Yeah.
but I can relate.
Yeah. There's like okay, but there's something more and we're not talking about it. You know,
Yeah.
we're not
That's what's
actually
interesting to
talking
me.
about it. Right.
Did you ever have any experiences as a child, like asking these open-ended questions? Did you ever have like mystical experiences or something that was like, whoa, I can't explain what that is? And
Yeah, yes, I have. I've had a number of them, throughout my childhood and adult life. And I almost hesitate to get into them because I also have that sense of like, well, it's really easy to go down that rabbit hole of like, I think it's just kind of like specialness about
sure.
it. It's
Yeah.
and they were really profound and special moments.
Hmm.
Um, and not like fully all of it, right? It's not
Yeah.
like the essence of it.
Yes. You don't have to give any details. In fact, I'll come back around at some point and say something about this, about what you just said. And like, I totally resonate with what you just said. And it's an important,
Yeah.
consideration for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I was
Yeah.
really young, I felt like there was, um, there was an kind of innate understanding or knowing of um, something much deeper and unspeakable, or and it was, I could see there was something more to some of the teachings and things that my mom brought around. But again, it still wasn't fully there yet, like fully landing. And I was also, I mean, I realized back then as a child, you're the way the mind works, it's not fully developed.
Mm.
And so it's almost hard to connect and land. Everything's very like concrete, and the way things are imagined to be. But but I was in a really good place. I remember they called me Happy Holly, and I was just open to the world and so, just so excited to meet and experience people and life and everything. I mean, When my mom taught me to sit still and meditate, I went outside and I did that. And I remember this moment where I was sitting under my swing set and I was watching the birds. And I realized that if I sat really, really still, the birds would act as if I wasn't even there and come right up to me and just, the robins would graze for worms or whatever was in the grass right next to me. I could touch them if I wanted to, and I got such a thrill out of just feeling like I was completely part of the natural world and it was all right there, feeling completely safe and in it.
Mm, beautiful.
So yeah, I have these memories and I feel like, there was a moment where things also shifted and I lost that,
Yeah.
right? There's like this building up of, oh, you're supposed to be somebody,
Yes.
and then all of the concepts build on top of that, and all of these ideas about self, and am I doing it the right way? And
Yeah. Do you
and
attribute that to any particular stage of maturing or any particular event or anything?
yeah, I mean, it really started to happen like almost like tribally it developed in like late or like in adolescence, right?
Yeah.
That kind of transition up into teenagerdom into
Yeah.
puberty, all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah,
That's how it was for me
absolutely.
as well. Like, I guess as I was going through it, it just felt like something was just wrong inside my head. Like there's so many thoughts and it started feeling solid. It felt so uncomfortable, but I didn't attribute it to a stage of life necessarily. But looking back, it's very obvious. Once you hit puberty, like brain chemistry changes. You become socially aware in a very different way. But the social awareness comes with a whole different like set of bindings that are cognitive in a way. And that was
Mhm.
so uncomfortable, but I felt it too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like before that, I was, you know, it's almost like enmeshment with like parents, with everything. Like there's not like a fully like developed sense of self yet.
Mm.
And then it's going into that place of insecurity of like, oh, I need to be somebody. And what is that? I have no clue.
Yeah.
So there's like pressure to form this sense of self, which sounds so ridiculous right now.
And then you're surrounded by other people who also feel the urgency to be somebody. And it seemed to me like some people were better at it than others. Now looking back, I know what that was. They were more mind identified and more comfortable with mind identification, I think. But yeah, it's like you're looking around at all of these like neurotic, depressed teenagers and anxious teenagers, and you're one of them. And it's like, but now we're playing this game of pretending we are someone and who we are going to be. Am I the popular one? Am I the good looking one, the ugly one, the good athlete, the bad athlete? Like, oh my God, what a game to play that is. And it's
Yeah,
so
and like
miserable.
everybody
Everything's
has
on the
it.
line.
Everything's on the line. Everyone has imposter syndrome. Like we're all like critically insecure. And
Mhm.
and the thing that I wish my parents had told me at that point in time was this is gonna suck. It sucks for everybody. Everyone's going through this. That's normal. you know.
Mm.
Uh, because it is normal.
Mhm.
It turns
Yeah.
out, that feeling of being like cripplingly lost and alone and completely insecure and confused about this whole process is just happening for everybody. I mean,
Oh man.
almost everybody, sure, at least.
If you could somehow give that statement to just adolescents and just tell them like, yeah, I know. And I know you have to fake that this isn't happening too, by the way, which makes it worse, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly, exactly. So, like on top of it, like you do, I mean, there's no sense. How can you ever feel like you belong anywhere without any sense of when you're just really literally like you have to exist in a state of inauthenticity from the
Yeah.
very beginning.
Yep.
and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah. Brutal, but true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whew. Yeah. You know, this
Yeah.
is a bit of an aside, but I've been working with and know well James McCleary, who is the executive producer of the documentary The Work. He's done like deep shadow facilitation, and he's an older guy, he's in his 70s, but he went, and when he started doing facilitation, he went to Africa and lived with and worked with a tribe there to learn their rites of passage and how they deal with all this stuff, right? And then he did it in a North American native culture as well as South American, I think. But and he's infused this with Western thought and all this stuff. But it really makes me think, just having this conversation, like that's something that's totally missing in our Western culture, is like rites of passage and like giving you some kind of context of what it means to be turned from a child to an adult. That's a huge transition. And when you have the whole
Yeah.
identity apparatus on top of it, so it's a lot of suffering. Yeah. And so we don't have a
Mhm.
paradigm for that. We don't have an honest, authentic way of talking to adolescents about what they're going through at all.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's huge. It's been on, at the top of my mind recently because I have a son-in-law who's been going through this. And I remember a few years ago we were talking, and we were, my husband and I were talking about the voice in the head, and he, pipes up and says, "Wait, what are you guys talking about?" We're like, the voice in your head. He goes, "What voice? People have a voice?" So we go through to explain this phenomena, and he says, and no, I don't have that. Okay,
Mhm.
we go, "Oh, well, how do you think, what happens in your head?" He says, I don't know. He says, "I don't
Yeah.
know."
I've had people tell me when I talk about aphantasia, which is inability to form a mental image, a visual image in the
Mhm.
mind, which like probably 1 out of 100 people have some version of it. But I've had people say, I don't have thoughts at all. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So I talk to them, and very quickly I realize, and they often realize they do have thoughts. They're just so identified with them, they don't realize that they have thoughts. And that's
Right.
fascinating, right? Like that we can
That
get
is
so
really
absorbed
fascinating.
to that mental identity that we are like seamless with it, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
so he comes back to me, and he like a year later, and he says, "So I have thoughts now. I have the voice." He tells me he has the voice. And I asked how it happened, and he said he was playing sports, and one of the other kids was upset and critical because like he had missed a pass or something, with the ball, and started like just kind of like had a bit of a blow up and said, aren't you thinking? Why aren't you, what are you thinking
Whoa.
about?"
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just kept like repeating this, like, think about it, think about it. And this is what kids do, right? They
Mm,
they get some sort of big impression from their environment, especially when there's a big upset or an emotional moment. They go
hmm.
back, they're alone, and they hear that repeating, like, think about it, or
Mm,
whatever it is, until it happens. And that's
yeah.
exactly what happened for him. And I hear about this all the time where, these things are conditioned into us, right? Like sadness, like certain reactions to specific environmental stimulants, right?
Mm,
Where, I mean, kids don't necessarily always know to be sad at a certain point in time, but if
mm,
they see everyone else being sad, then they can go practice being sad, and then they'll have that kind of emotional response mapped to the stimulus of
mm,
whatever they're supposed to be sad about.
mm. This topic is fascinating, and I think hopefully it's revealing to anyone watching, because what we're talking about is actually very direct about thought and identification with thought. And if you think back, like I think if anybody just sort of reflects on their childhood, you'll find that adults tell children things like this all the time. They say like, "What were you thinking?" Or pay attention, or pay attention to what you're doing. And it's like that puts you in your head. You're like, okay, how do I pay attention to what I'm doing? It's like you're usually so immersed into what you're doing as a young child that there's no standing back, like reflecting on yourself and what you're doing in this environment in that sort of second person way or third person way or whatever it is in the internal world. But we're actually trained to do it. We're taught again and again, go back into that internal world and process what's happening seemingly apart from what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's no wonder that this mechanism in our mind tends to roll on like uncontrollably until it becomes completely neurotic.
Mm.
And now we're suffering at the hands of our own thoughts.
Mm. Yeah. Yep. I
There's
had
no
that in
training wheels.
spades.
No one's
Yeah.
teaching you not how to not do that,
Yeah.
at that age.
Yeah. Man, and I'm not even sure, gosh, I don't know. This is so fascinating. I'm not sure if you can teach someone not to do it as they're developing an identity. It's like they're either interested in seeing through that or they're not. But it gets tied into fear very quickly. The fear of actually letting go of that too, strangely enough. Like letting go of that mental identity and so forth. How was it for you? Like, did you start to notice that very obviously, like having an internal thought process and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there were like things that snuck up on me and definitely surprised me,
Hmm.
even later on in life. And then there were other things where, I would get into those like conversations in my head and rolling and like reflecting back on, what had previously happened and did I do that right and could I do it better? Those like rehearsing of, you know, experiences where maybe there was like embarrassment or shame that came up and these really awkward social situations or places where it was painful where oftentimes that because of that lack of sense of acceptance or belonging or like feeling safe in my environment and with my culture and all of that, not having that, that basic sense of safety really disrupted like my access to any sense of peace, well-being, all of
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
great point. It's like there's definitely a divergence here between maybe someone who's had pretty severe childhood trauma where their family wasn't even safe. But if you grew up in a reasonably safe emotional environment, you feel safe around your family. So safety wasn't a concern. You didn't even know it was a thing until it was threatened by having a social persona now, a social, because that's threatened all the
Mhm.
time. And so now if
Yeah.
safety means that you're accepted in a group and there's mass confusion in the group about identity and about everything, like you're going to start to feel pretty unsafe. And I think this,
Yeah.
interestingly, is can be very challenging for people even who had a very good upbringing, like a very, emotionally healthy and nurtured and protected upbringing. It can be very surprising when all of a sudden your identity is now a social identity and you realize like not everybody out there's so nice, and it can be
Right.
challenging. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. For me, that started pretty early. I mean, I could tell, because my parents were different, probably a lot of that awareness, was there for my dad. And I think that led to insecurity for him. So there were, being at home wasn't perfect. I think, he developed some social anxiety around all of that. And we didn't have a lot of money, but I was going to a school where it was very upper middle class. Everyone's parents were pretty highly educated, and they were usually, two parent, earners or something, and uh, everyone was very brand conscious. Like food, clothing, everything had to have a brand. And if it wasn't, like there was something wrong.
Mm.
I remember the first day of second grade, and this little boy comes up to me and says, "Hey, look," and turns around and points to his butt. And I was like, why is he pointing to his butt? And then he like goes closer and says, "Look," and finds the logo and points out there's like a, Guess Jeans brand logo. I hadn't even heard of it, but I was like, "Oh, cool, cool. Yeah,
Right.
yeah." Right. Okay.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah. And,
Wow.
I had a couple girls over for a birthday party when I was fourth grade. And uh, the next like week on Monday, one of them comes up to me and she's flanked by two other girls, and we're all lined up in the school lunch line. So nobody really approaches anybody in the lunch line. They just stand in the lunch line. So at this point, everybody was looking at us.
Oh, wow.
And oh man, this was so embarrassing. And so she says, my friends and I have gotten together and we've decided that we're going to host a food drive for you at our church. And I was,
Wow.
I mean, just mortified at the moment. And I politely said, no, thank you. We're just fine. We don't need a food drive. We have plenty of good food. But I mean, my parents, we grew a lot of our own food. I was probably eating better than most of those kids, but
Right,
because the
exactly.
pizza that my mom made from scratch for my birthday party did not have, Pizza Hut on the box, they thought something was really wrong. And we didn't have, super fancy house or anything, it just like they were, I mean, and she was probably legitimately concerned,
Mhm.
bless her heart. I
Things
was
change. Things
not.
change so much now, right? Like it's kind of now it's to be have organic food and grow your own food and these sorts of things is like it's almost it's almost a mark of status, right? In a
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So like those things impact, even if if I was safe and I wasn't being like harmed,
Mhm.
uh, I wasn't starving, I was safe at home. I had, a good family, that wasn't perfect by any means. And we can get into that, but, plenty of things to have, minor traumas about and impacts my personality and give me plenty to work on later, when it comes time to dig into the shadow work. But,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, like it was really clear, the difference. One of the things that helped me, even recently, to kind of put this in context was, I really like to. I'm endlessly curious, still, and so I love learning about us, about psychology, sociology. So I'm reading this, social science study. And it turns out that, from the findings of this, they're explaining that, essentially it's not whether you're poor or you're rich that, really makes a difference in terms of people's health and mental and emotional well-being. At this point, at least for societies that have sort of taking care of the basic sanitation and
Mhm.
and food things. We have food in our bellies and you know uh, plumbing.
Yeah.
Well, right beyond that, it's more about the, real difference and span between the wealthiest and the poorest, and that disparity, in the haves and the have-nots and their exposure to each other is actually what produces a lot of stress.
I'll bet.
And
Yeah.
it's having that in your face all the time, and that was particularly difficult for me because I wanted to participate, I wanted to belong, I wanted to have all the other kids. I see them going and they're doing these really awesome after school programs. You can see they're getting together and they're playing sports or doing martial arts or dance or art or all these things, but those things cost money.
Mm-hmm.
And that just wasn't available when I was really young.
Mm-hmm.
I was a first child. My parents, just weren't making a lot of money at the time. You know, they were, they taught me a lot of skills, and I learned to do a lot of things that other kids didn't do, and that I value now, more so. I have a condo that I just bought and I'm renovating it myself. It's my fourth renovation, and I know how to do most of these things myself because I was taught this stuff by my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I was given that level of confidence and independence, but I wasn't given the other things that the other kids
Mhm.
had at that time. And it just kind of made that chasm feel bigger.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. That the study you quoted, that the disparity is something that has a lot of like has a big psychological hit, I'm sure, because if you think of the lower extreme, like a sort of native culture or whatever, or indigenous culture, there probably isn't that, right? Because you already know who you are. We're all the same. We all live the way we live, and there's a really fascinating documentary. It's a pretty short documentary. I think it's called $1 a Day or Living on $1 a Day. And these two, I think they were maybe undergrad or grad students. They were trying to create a model, like yeah, they're trying to create a model for cultures that live off the equivalent of $1 per day. So like native cultures basically, and indigenous cultures. And they're like, well, the best way to know about it is let's just go do it. So they went and lived with a tribe. I think it was in South America, and they would pay themselves $1 a day, give or take, and they kind of would open envelopes every day, and sometimes it would have none in it, sometimes it would have $3, but it averaged $1 a day for like a month. And they lived with this group, and they were like really uncomfortable because it was so different than what they were used to, like no amenities, like what we consider safety. They just don't see it. It's because like,
Yeah.
if you get sick here, you might just die because no one has money to bring you to the hospital. So they kind of had that psychological hit. But after a while, they realized like everyone around here is actually really happy. Like they noticed, wow, they don't have anything that we would consider, material wealth here at all. And yet everybody seems happy, and they all know what to do, and they all know their place, and they all connect really well. And that really showed me something. I was really fascinated by that. But I can also see how when you take the opposite of that, where there are haves and have-nots in certain ways, and you judge and base your own standing in a social circle or a group on that, like that can be really stressful to the psyche.
Yeah. Yeah. It was particularly difficult because I knew other people were judging me for, these very like surface level things that, I was taught don't matter. But so it's like it was almost a double kind of impact for me because I
Mm,
couldn't connect around what I thought was really important with these other
mm,
kids,
mm.
you know.
That's
Yeah.
important right there. That's an important statement, is like you had the sort of knowledge, and yet the social message you're getting back to you is saying actually the way you perceive values is not the way this group perceives the same values. Like to us, it actually does matter, right? And there's a
Mhm.
lot of cognitive dissonance that's going to arise there. It's like, well, who am I then? Where do I
Yeah.
actually belong? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And and I kind of had to eke that out, over
Mhm.
time. But it was yeah, it was confusing. And it was I think there was like resentment that built up around that too, because I felt like I had wisdom, like I believed in, in my values, but it was very difficult to find people who did. And I realized something that, my parents, I don't know if you're familiar with spiral dynamics
Mhm.
and like integral theory. So like my parents came like from a spiral dynamics point of view, it's like the green meme. And
Yeah.
they're hippies. They kind of checked out and said, this whole thing is not working, it's not sustainable. We're gonna do things differently. And because they knew that like everybody's experience is different and valid, and they gave that sort of foundation to me at a really early age. I had to think like I basically had to like figure it out. And to figure it out, I had to like look around and figure out, well, what does everybody else believe? And how am I going to figure out what I believe? And what is that? So I was, suddenly this, investigator, I was this scientist going around and really taking in all these perspectives. And
Mm,
it gave me an integral point of view really young because I just kept taking in more
mm,
perspectives and going, well, pretty much everything that I've come across is, well, that's like not it, but it's partially So, like partially
Yeah.
true, partially true, partially true, something here, but not the whole thing, not
Mm,
all the way. This isn't like it's still just partially true.
mm,
And that kept me going and kept me asking questions and kept me curious until like my most innate habit, is that curiosity, is coming back to that and coming to like figure out something, open it up, try it on, walk around, wear it for a little while and go, is this true?
yeah.
Partially true, you know.
Beautiful. I mean, if you're going to have an innate quality that's prominent, curiosity is a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I'm really grateful for that gift, but it could be really lonely.
Mhm. Yeah. So, what point did things start to take more of a spiritual turn, or I don't know how you would define that, but like investigating into your own deeper nature?
Well, I mean, I was asking that question when I was 4 because I was asking my parents. Like I was looking for an answer, like, how is it? What is, what's what's the deal?
Yeah.
Other people are talking about how it is and telling me how it is at church and these things. And, you know, but how is it?
Yeah.
And they gave me no answer. They gave me like, well, we'll tell you about kind of what we believe, but
Yeah.
you know, we can't tell you what to believe. So I was asking that question from then and always asking it. Um, and and I had like inklings and I had peak experiences throughout childhood where like I remember meditating with my mom and my siblings and I had a vision of Jesus came and I mean everything was just love and I remember crying. I remember like telling my mom like what happened to me. And everything's just love. And it was the sweetest thing because I had my family there. I had my siblings and my mom, and everybody was hugging and like this is awesome.
Mm,
But even if that was an awakening moment, I wasn't sure. I didn't have like a context for that. There was
mm,
nobody saying like this happens with Jesus and this is
mm,
normal.
mm.
And even in in the context of the Yogananda's teachings, there were things like look for a blue light, and like I was
Yeah.
like, well, there's no blue light, so I'm not there.
Right.
I don't know, whatever. And there are these things they're like it's supposed to be this way, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I didn't have a lot of context for it. But I was always open to it. And in high school, I pretty early I discovered psychedelics, and that definitely opened up some experiences of like shifting, the nature of reality and what could possibly be. But again, there's no context or real guidance for it. I
Mm,
was just kind of groping around in the dark.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and and sometimes experiences were amazing and sometimes they were really scary.
Yeah.
And
I I was
I
gonna say I
know.
had experience as well with psychedelics in high school and like um the first time was very, very obvious. Like in retrospect, is very obvious, but it was such an empty experience that I had no context for it at all. It wasn't distressing. It wasn't anything. It was like completely blown into like void experience for like 2 hours or something. And then it was like, oh, now the psychedelic parts are coming back into floating back in like the trails and all that stuff. It was like the visual aspects of it, but I didn't have a context, and so I attributed it to the sensory disturbances or whatever. Um, but I think it definitely opened. It actually, in some sense, probably opened up more shadow for me. It probably opened up more like suffering, which is good. Like that's kind of the first step. If you don't realize you suffer, you won't want to wake up from suffering, probably. So, anyway, that was kind of my simple experience with it.
Yeah, yeah. My first experience with it was it was like I got the cosmic joke and
Mm,
I just started laughing and laughing and I was with my like with my friends, and it was like time for me to go home, and they're going, we can't send her home like this. I could not stop laughing. My sides were hurting and everything was hilarious. Like everything. It's been
That's awesome.
completely. But I also had, so I skipped my high school graduation to go to the farm in Summertown, Tennessee. It's this old commune. It's famous for its midwifery program. They've been around since the 60s. I mean, this is, original hippies checking out of traditional society and going and living this way. And so they have the Unity Fest. And I decided, I wanted to do that instead of, sit around while 500 people walk onto a stage. So I went.
Sounds like a sane decision.
Right. Well, it hadn't seemed like a good idea. But at the time, my boyfriend said, "Hey, do you want to try mushrooms?" And I said, "Sure." And he gave me a lot of mushrooms, and I had no context for any of this, but it was like getting dark and it was a camp out. So it was like I didn't feel, the problem was it was new and I didn't know anybody. So there wasn't like that basic grounding of like safety and like just really no sense of grounding whatsoever. And from that, I mean, it was just nightmarish. I thought I have done something terribly wrong and I really am going to hell right here and right now. There were like hippies playing with a flashlight, but I was seeing witches sacrificing a baby. I was like, let's get somewhere safe. We went into the tent, and the tent was in this forested area, and flashlight on the tent, like the tent is covered in spiders. And so it's just like crawling with spiders. And then we get inside the tent and we're looking at each other and we realize we are covered in ticks. And
Oh my gosh.
there are like 20 plus ticks. We're like stripping down and like peeling ticks off of each other.
Wow.
But and then I'm like, okay, I just can't deal. So I lay down, I closed my eyes, and it was a kaleidoscope of the 7 deadly sins, and like everything that was like taught to me was wrong, and just coming at me in this like intense technicolor onslaught. And so when I had enough of that, and that was just not going away, I looked at him and he looked scary too. So I said, let's just go to the car. So I ended up sitting in the car with the light on, looking at the moon, and I got to a place that was good, but it was it was not great. But there was just all of that was in there. All of that was in there, and it was nothing in that I would have context for from my regular daily life, other than just like these are the cultural nightmare things that nobody wants to look at, that all just came up and said, look at us, we're here.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, at that point I was really I was really in that seeking mode of like something else, something more is here, what's here. There were a lot of caves around. I had someone drop me off at night at a cave, and I went in there with just like a little like a sleeping bag, like some water, a flashlight, and like a lighter, I think, just really, really basic. I was like, I'm going to have, whatever kind of journey experience I have in the complete dark, and they're going to come back and get me in a day or so. And yeah, so I went way deep into this cave, and my flashlight died. And
wow.
I had batteries. It wasn't the batteries. It was actually the bulb burnt out. And I was way back in there. I mean, there was just no way that I was getting out. So like I had gone back through room after room. I went through a tiny little like like this little igloo shaped room. And then I crawled on my belly for 15 feet with my bag tied to my foot and came out into this bigger giant cavern. And the cavern was monstrous. And the walls all kind of sloped down into like these little like crevices that went smaller and smaller on the side. So it was almost impossible to find when I came in, even though I kind of had that sense of direction still. And I was terrified. I remember just like that fear of like, oh God, will I get out of here? Is this
right.
going to happen? Like I had to just straight up face that. Like, so, I sat and I just focused on my breath and I listened to the sounds of the cave and got to a place where I was calm again. Uh, and I tried to change the bulb because it was actually like a mag, like they have a bulb built into them. Like you can actually do that. But I just wasn't practiced or dexterous enough to do it at the moment when it's just lost. So I went, well, I have this lighter. So I figured out that I could kind of hold it back and flick it and get like a snapshot of what's in front of me, and then go a couple steps and do that again without kind of burning my fingers. And I did that and I felt around and I did that and I felt around. And it took me an hour or two, but I found my way out of that room. And then I slowly found my way back out and out of the cave.
Nice.
And I remember going and I was like, I'm going to go sit down by this stream that was down below the cave, thinking like the sound of the stream sounded nice. And it's amazing what happens at night around a stream. I mean, the forest is alive. There were all sorts of things happening. And I mean, it was like little like things scurrying, making noises, interacting with each other. I mean, I feel like I was at the party. And I couldn't see any of it. So again, this was not at all comforting or peaceful. So I then left that area. I found a field and it was open and it was bright and there was moonlight and it seemed spacious and safe and calm. And I was ready to just rest into that and look, and I could see the stars, the sky. And I finally just get to a place where I feel at peace and just grateful that I to be alive. And as I'm resting there, starting to close my eyes and calm down, it sounded like thunder on my head. These two horses, okay? I hear just like boom, 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 boom. I shot up and I screamed. And as they passed me, just like this, they were running through the field. And I mean, just like I'm right in between them. And they just dart as, like top speed to the other end, stop and turn around and face me. And I just sit there and stare at them. And they stand there and stare at me.
Wow. Two wild horses, right? Just running.
Yeah, they almost ran me over. Completely.
Man, good. Like, thank goodness they didn't. God.
Yeah. I mean, it was like kind of like moment after moment in this experience that night of just like, I could die. I'm like, I'm just looking into the face of death over and over and over again.
No kidding. I mean, your intuition led you to this cave experience, but that sounds like almost a curated cave experience to bring you as close to death as possible in multiple ways.
My feeling of it was like I did something. I did not do this correctly. I was in that space of like I have messed up. I don't know, I should have like asked for permission to be here. Like there is something like where I am just like not in alignment with this space and not at peace with it and is saying go. But but it left me with that intense sense of gratitude coming out of it, of being alive. I mean, I was present. I was terrified, and I was very, very present through that experience. And even though, it was scary, there was something very, magical about that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably imagined I'm going to go like meditate in a cave and it's going to be, mystical or something like that. And then all that happened, but that's so perfect too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I put myself through some stuff. And I also traveled, I traveled, we drove, my boyfriend at the time, and I drove 8 hours to Memphis. They're opening a peace museum there dedicated to Martin Luther King. And Thich Nhat Hanh was really good friends with Martin Luther King. And so he came with all the monks and nuns from Plum Village and offered like a free weekend workshop. And so we drove to sit with them. And that was a very powerful experience for me. Sitting with Thai, there was just something about him. And, my system, I think it was really the first time I really sat in presence with someone who I felt this like emanation or transmission from, who really just embodied awakeness. And it was like, I don't know, my mirror neurons, something just lit up in me, and I felt that. And profoundly, my life wasn't set up in a way that it was easy to just sink into that and spend time with that and support that. It was fairly tumultuous, and I had tumultuous relationships and stresses. So I popped out, but that was really powerful. And there was a really powerful moment where I went with my mom to a big conference where it was a huge room with like, I don't know, a couple thousand people all chanting together. And they're singing Hugh, which is supposed to be a love song to God. So that's the intention. So imagine everyone is singing with, this love from their heart. And that left me feeling in a place of universal love for everyone and everything. At the time I was smoking, and I just quit like cold turkey, like it was nothing. I didn't even think about it. It just like obliterated that habit. And, it was almost like a little dangerous, because I was just like loving everyone at the time. And I almost I met this guy there, and he almost like moved from Montreal to be with me in Tennessee, and but I didn't, it was like it was hard, because I was in that state of like really like unconditional love without boundaries. And it took me a little while to realize like it's not personal, like that's here for everybody. And it's not a good time to make big life decisions.
That.
It's like I could have adopted every orphan and every kitten, and just
Yeah, I've had these experiences is just like that, actually.
Yeah. So I had these peak experiences, but they still like like kind of down regulated and everything kind of went back to normal. And then I got really busy being, adulting,
Mm.
having a career, earning money, having a relationship. I got married, and my husband had a lot of health issues.
Mm.
And so I got really, really busy kind of juggling between work and I was getting more ambitious because I wanted to make sure that we were going to be okay financially, if he needed to take time off and and he was struggling a lot, and he was, like this really brilliant being, who was, really like an inspiring person, who could do incredible things and had done so much. He, his body was breaking down because,
Mm.
despite his capacity and his generosity, he was not turning that light back around on himself
Mm.
and caring for himself and slowing down. And it was his kind of commitment to who he was identified with being
Mm.
was really strong,
Mm.
and just wasn't willing to let that go.
Yeah. What,
So,
what sort of work did you go into?
so at the time, well, I've had a few lives at this point. My first kind of career was in art and design.
Mm.
So I was a painter and graphic designer and illustrator. And then when my husband and I got together, I got into network engineering.
Mm.
And so I was in the world of technology, IT, and he was also in that world. And if you like about 7 years ago, he died.
Mm.
And uh, it was it was really, I mean, the moment I found out, it it hit me so instantly. I mean, I just crumpled, and all this emotion went through, and I collapsed, and it felt like I collapsed, like all of me. And everything, this whole like personhood that I had built up, um, of being that, his wife, and everything I did as that just died too. It all just went.
Mm.
And it was it was so disorienting because I didn't have any desire to go back to, my job or anything. And I mean, I, certainly was depressed, but it was more than that. It took away more than just motivation.
Mm.
It was like just a total disruption of identity.
Mm.
And so, I wanted to figure out, like, what do I do now? What do I do now? Like, I just was completely lost. And I kind of just had to be with being lost,
Mm.
and not knowing what was going to come. But I was motivated by the experience, of seeing really like what happened to him, where like this intense identification with, you know, being a certain way, having a certain role, uh, led for him. And I could see, there was a lot of trauma there. And there was, this need to be loved. There was a desire to be loved and to receive love. And he was chasing something. And I went, that it's so tragic that this brilliant being had to go in that way. And I don't think it was necessary, and it's tragic that there weren't more resources. There wasn't more education or, these simple things built into our awareness around trauma, around these sort of patterns that we get into, and how to help ourselves and each other to get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I had to learn about that. I got motivated to learn about that and to take care of myself a little bit as well, because at the time I was going through, these survivor's guilt. I was having nightmares around that. And so I just started trying out different modalities and doing shadow work.
Which sorts of modalities did you try?
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first ones that really made a difference was the emotional freedom technique, tapping. So I'd go in and tap on these different, points and say even though I'm having this experience of survivor's guilt, I still fully and completely love and accept myself.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that, I felt for the first time this powerful movement in my body. The shift happened and the nightmare stopped, just like that. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, just overnight. It was that happened, and then that was really something. And then I'm like, okay, there's something to this. I don't know how it's working, but as long as it works, I don't need to know. Okay, let's keep going. And so, I kind of asked, well, what else is there? What else can I do? And so I was curious, and I remember I was sitting there listening to a podcast, and there's this guy on there who's says he's a shaman, and he's talking about negative self-talk, the mean voice in the head. And I just paused it and I stopped and I asked a question. I said, do I have any negative self-talk that I'm not aware of that's impacting my life in a major way? And the weirdest thing happened. It never happened before, and didn't really happen again. A voice showed up that was not like the voice in my head. It was not like anything, and I heard it audibly, even though there was no one there. It sounded like it was a voice in the room, which was just phenomenologically wild to me. And it said yes, around women in positions of spiritual leadership.
Wow.
Yeah. I went, whoa. And I went, well, okay. What just happened? And that makes sense. I mean, I was like, I can justify that. I grew up in a very patriarchal society, and men were preachers, women weren't. And even the more open hippie-ish or Eastern stuff I was exposed to, everyone was a man. I had no example in my life of females being awake, essentially, or having a deeper connection. And so I had this sort of limiting belief. So in that moment, I was like, well, all right, let's investigate this. So I got out my old friend Google and I said, okay, well, who is this guy that's talking here? He's a shaman. What does that even mean? What does it mean to be a shaman? Where are all the female shamans? So I go Googling for female shaman. And I find this article. It's like an archaeological report, and there's a rendering of this, like a recreation essentially of a female shaman. They had uncovered this really old grave. It was like one of the oldest fully complete discoveries of like an indigenous shamanic practitioner, I guess, and it was a woman.
Mm.
And I see this image of her, and I see like she's got like there's like a wolf's head, like pelts, and these things dangling here, and all this face paint and whatever. And it just, when I saw it, something happened. And like I don't really remember like the in between, but I was suddenly on the floor, and I was on my knees, and I was crying, and it felt like it felt like a fire hose of light was just pouring into my heart. And and I was just crying and crying, and there was this sense of not being alone, of of safety, of belonging, of like so much love.
Mm.
And all of that just kept pouring in and pouring in, and it was like information. It felt like real information for my system in this. And I was crying tears of gratitude. It's this sense of like food for the soul. Like
Mm.
the experience was, like coming out of a desert,
Mm.
and having the experience of water for the first time. It was, I have no explanation for it, but it hit me so deeply that I just I just stopped. I just really just stopped everything. And I remember afterwards kind of getting up and going like, whoa, where am I? Like, is anybody else here? Like I didn't have roommates, and no one was home at the time. Or I had like three roommates and no one was home at the time. And so I just kind of had that experience on my own, but it's like I wouldn't have even known if anyone else, I don't know, like I was just in multi-dimensional experience of intensity. And I just wiped my calendar clean. I remember I had plans. I had plans to go see a show. I was going to go see Bonobo. I really liked Bonobo, and I really would have enjoyed that show, but I had like no motivation to do anything but like stop and listen. I was just listening and like looking for like, what do I do next? I'm just like, I let everything drop,
Mm.
and just listened from that point on. And
Mm.
there was, this kind of just just giving up, just giving up that, and trusting whatever was happening.
Yeah.
And
I use the term surrender sometimes, and people invariably ask, what does it mean? So if anyone doesn't know what surrender means, just listen to the last 10 minutes of what you said. Yeah. Yeah. How long ago was this?
um, this was November 17th, 2018.
Mm.
I actually remember that because in that moment, it felt like I really felt like a different person. I felt like a totally new chapter to my life.
Mm. Did you have a
And
change? Did you have a like a noticeable change in your sense of I or your sense of self or thoughts or any of it?
yeah, well, like immediately I felt like, there was like control was completely an illusion. I
Mm,
wasn't in charge and there was no, there wasn't, it wasn't my choice. I was kind of fooling myself into believing I was making decisions and I was in charge. So there was like this process of just giving up and giving up to that. And I was giving up to just being open to whatever was coming and kind of feeling like I'm not in charge. Um, how do I even know what to do next? And so it
mm,
was in that like state of being in the question that like intuition answers
hmm
would come, but I didn't know from where. And it certainly didn't feel like it was coming from like the like identified self.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask this. I don't know if a great way to ask it, but did you have some kind of sense of a certain framework? And I'm not looking for a specific answer at all. I'm just curious, like that this, like, oh, this is God, or this is awakening or Brahman consciousness, or was there any tendency to put it in a framework at all?
No, I mean, I, I'd been exposed to so many different things because I'd been so curious.
Hmm
So I had read a lot and I had taken courses. Uh, I don't know if you know Houston Smith, but he was like
hmm
he became a he wrote a book about world religions, and
mm
he has a really beautiful way of like immersing himself in them and like exploring them from a place of reverence,
mm.
but complete openness to
Yeah.
everything. And so I really identified with him. I felt really grateful for like that sort of exposure to different things, but I didn't have it. I mean, it was just the experience, just the pure
Yeah.
experience. I really didn't. It felt wrong almost to assign something to it.
Yeah. That was my sense of how you would answer the question. And as I always do in these videos, I'm like pointing for people, that is very, very important, actually. The depth of an insight and the depth of an awakening is like kind of proportional to your complete lack of even an interest in contextualizing it. It's so like the words I sometimes use are intuitively obvious or self-validating. The experience is
Mhm.
self-validating. Everything you need to know is already there. There's no need to
Yeah.
like say, "Oh, this is X, Y, Z," and so forth. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
So I opened to that. I opened to that sense of intuition, and I got these sort of knowing downloads, whatever it's information is coming, and that sense of knowing where it's coming from or why or how it doesn't connect and it doesn't have to be there. That just started happening, and it said you need to find a real life living teacher, community, cohort. You can't like live your life in books,
Mm,
anymore. It's time to do this. And I just,
yeah.
okay, and then I opened to like, okay, how do I do that? And just kind of waited for funny intuitions to come where like something would pop in and I would go, okay, I'd look that up. And then that would lead me to an experience and to find what was coming next.
Mm,
And I always want to like preface this with I think it's so important to develop discernment in these moments. And I'm so grateful for my sense of discernment because I realize there are a lot of people out there who are uh, it's not a clear teaching. It's can be predatory. People are there to take advantage of people who are this open in this
mhm.
state, and I am really, really, really grateful for that.
Mm.
Um,
If
and,
there's
and
if there's something that is truly a gift of grace, it is discernment. I think. I love that you're
yes.
touching on this. And what do you think? What is your instinct on what? I mean, to some degree, it's either there or it's not. But I always try to make the ineffable effable. You know, and like, what kind of advice could I give somebody who? Because some people know this about themselves that they tend to fall into culty type situations, or they tend to be duped. You know, what advice can you give about discernment? What have you learned about discernment? How can
Mm,
somebody tune into their own discernment and so forth?
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, like for me, I think my tendency to stay in curiosity, I treat life like a scientist, and so I have uh, access to question. And if anyone ever were to tell me that's not acceptable, that questioning is not on the menu, or were to show up and tell me, act as an authority about my system,
Mhm.
about, this being here, even even if it is all one thing, boundaryless, awake, awareness, in the realm of relative, there's no one who has a really, pure, true transmission that's going to show up and ask you for things or tell you, how you are, go against your innate wisdom.
Mhm. Yeah.
You are the authority
Mm.
for what's best for you, and your body, your system is going to tell you a yes or a no. And
Yeah.
it's just so important to learn how to listen to that,
Mhm.
and to slow down, and to be really present for that, and notice when the energy doesn't feel clean.
Mm.
If uh, someone shows up and they actually, if it's right, if it's right, it's not going to feel like, it's not going to be a personal experience, right? They're not going to come for the individual and want something from the individual.
Right.
It's not about that.
Yeah. Including wanting you to see it their way, which sneaks in a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. It in my experience, there can be a transmission, there can be a teaching, there can be truth. And if and there's also, I guess, I don't know, like there's an opposing truth too.
Mm.
There needs to be room for dissent, for questioning, for
Mhm.
paradox, for more than one thing to be true,
Yes.
right?
Oh yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh
Beautiful. Beautifully stated. And it's also what we're talking about isn't a what, but it's alive. It's always changing. So I could answer the same question maybe from the same
yes,
person today and tomorrow, and my answer may be completely different because
yes.
there's nothing fixed. There's no fixed reality that I'm gonna kind of sell anybody or try to. And like, your points are so good. Let me just go back over them for anyone listening to this. When I asked about discernment, like, I think the first thing you said was your own natural curiosity, learning to trust your own natural curiosity, and that curiosity never has to come to an end. There's no final end to curiosity. In fact, it just becomes everything in a sense, right? And that's beautiful. Like, trust your own curiosity and let that just keep driving this deeper. Second thing you said was more about the teacher, like the red flag of somebody trying to curtail your curiosity. Someone's saying, like, if someone's discouraging you in any way, including subtly discouraging your own curiosity, there's dynamics at play that are culty. Like, there are, for sure, right? Because and that actually is a really common red flag I hear from people who have been abused. Abused just means it can mean anything, but sometimes it's like truly abused. Sometimes it's just, misled for years with a group that's not really that interested in waking up, but more interested in, whatever the teacher's interested in and stuff. But it's that red flag that like, yeah, they discouraged me from other teachers. They discouraged me from other things, from other practices. And, but I always have to ask, like, why? Why would I would never discourage anybody from any practice unless I thought if I care about them, I'm close to them, and I think that they're doing something truly harmful to themselves, I might say something. But generally speaking, like I tell people, find what works for you. Follow your intuition. It's so important to follow your own intuition and to hone your intuition and to trust your intuition, and let it take you
Yes.
past your own doubts, which your doubts are already going to be manipulated by other people who are manipulative. They will manipulate you
Yes.
through your doubts.
Right through your shadows. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like, do the work, right? Like really, really turn and look like what's here, because that which I don't see is going to be like, Velcro with these little hooks sticking out for, anybody who has an agenda to grasp onto.
Mm.
And I won't necessarily know that
Mm.
I'm being manipulated in that way. It's, or, I might not be looking. I might not want to look.
Mm.
There's a fun book called Existential Kink.
Mm.
There's a lot of different books on these topics, but I thought this one was really, I mean, I love anything that's funny. I love to laugh.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I get such a kick out of this concept of like secretly, getting off on, suffering and setting
Yeah.
yourself up to suffer some more and like play out this dynamic in like a kinky, secrety way,
You're right. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, I think I said to someone earlier today, sometimes you just have to beat your head against the wall long enough to realize it feels really good when you stop doing that. You know?
Right. It's like, so that the invitation of that book is just to like ask the question, like,
Mm.
what about this do I like? Like, what
Mm.
about this suffering experience? Like, how is it actually meeting my need?
Mm.
What need am I trying to get met through this
Mhm. Yeah.
experience? And is it really meeting my need?
Mm.
Really, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I already can feel it. Like your orientation to and handle on shadow work is it's great. Like we could probably do a whole other video on that. Maybe we will at some
Oh,
point.
totally.
Um, so I want to, I mean, I don't want to fast forward past anything if you have anything else to bring in, but I do want to point this one thing out that's funny. It's actually how I met you. So for anyone watching, I was at this Amplify conference and I gave a talk, but it was like 90 minutes. And I don't usually do 90-minute talks. So I'm like, what am I going to talk about for 90 minutes? So I thought, okay, well, what if I break it down, the process sort of down into 3 segments? It's like um, presence as consciousness, presence as shadow, and then essentially presence as non-dual. I was kind of pointing to non-dual or later stage realization. I can't even remember what I called that. Presence as emptiness. So anyway, I do this whole like 90-minute thing, and I'm talking about deep stage realization at the end, and come off stage and meeting people. And Holly walks up to me and she goes, "You left out the most important part." And I was like, for a second, I was like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And then I realized what you're talking about, and I was like, "Wow, okay, that really." People don't say things like that to me, or pick it up that like that is the most important part. So what were you talking about? What's the most important part?
What was I talking about? I have to remember what you said, what I thought about it.
I think you were I think you were talking about no self-realization. That's what I thought you were talking
Yeah.
about. Because we talked
Yeah.
about it a little bit after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because you were kind of getting there to that
Yeah.
place.
I ran out of
Yeah.
time.
I was actually kind of getting there as well in my stories. The first real like experience I had of that kind of came next, and the following my intuition and listening to where do I go next. I found my way to a couple workshops with a teacher, Annalisa Edelberg.
Mm.
Uh, she really fit for me. heard her speak and it made total sense. I resonated, and I could also see a lot of myself in her. And that was really helping to like touch into those parts of myself that went like, women don't, wake up and have this and all of that. So I was releasing all of that. And she offered a collaborative workshop in Berkeley, California, with a Zen teacher named Doshin Roshi from Boulder, Colorado.
Mm. Mm.
And these two got together and did something completely unique in that experience, where they kind of partnered up, and they invited us to think of something that was really bugging us, something that we were struggling with, and then to bring that, to them. And he would, through a very, classic Zen questioning, he would help us to just break down where that was coming from, what's behind that, what's really happening here, and, like koan style befuddle you, and then pass over to Annalisa, who is also an incredibly gifted healing practitioner, and her capacity for holding in this deep place of vulnerability is just really, something special. And so that sense of being held by her is so disarming, and it it really allows you to go into whatever shadow piece is there very directly. So, I saw one person go through this process, and I just threw myself into that seat as soon as the chance was available and said, "Me next. I want to go." And I expressed my frustration at something my mother was doing, which was like clearly to me martyrdom. And and it just bothered me so much that she was giving up so much, in without, with regards to herself. And so I'm, getting these questions from Doshin Roshi, and I just kind of hit that point of like, and he goes, "She's ready," and passes me over, and then I go deep into into the depths of this fear that was there, and I mean, I all the way to the fear of complete like annihilation and obliteration, and I go into that as she's really following and present with me through it. And I mean, like it's just everything disintegrated. And like, I mean, physical matter, reality, like everything seemed to disintegrate. I found myself on the floor again, and it was very disorienting. I was in great hands, and I was really being held and mirrored and reflected and presenced and like taken care of afterwards. I'm really glad that there were these understanding beings like feed me and look after me, and just I had someone there to just eye gaze with the entire break. After it was like a lunch break afterwards, but there was, all of a sudden there's no solidity to anything. Actually, there's no existence to anything. Nothing exists. I don't exist. Nothing. It's just gone. And then it's very confusing because of like the senses are still kind of there, but it's like there's not, and like it's, it's like feeling the floor, but like not, but there's no one to feel the floor, and and it goes through going through this process of like complete paradox in the experience, utterly. And just like just so wiped, like blank slate, just completely blank slate, like newborn baby, just nothing there. Gone.
Mm.
And even that took time to integrate, right? So far out of context, so deepened, so quickly. But I was really lucky to continue to have these teachers and to have more teachers. And my teachers that I chose encouraged me, not only said, yes, please learn from other teachers, but here are some really good ones, and here's some more, and here's some more, and just passed along resources of trustworthy people I could learn from. And I did.
Who did you find helpful at that point?
So Lot Kelly was amazing. Annalisa is awesome. Dr. Daniel Brown, who's no longer with us, but Destin DePerna took over, and some other folks, John Churchill, and that sort of lineage. Oh, I mean, back to Thich Nhat Hanh.
Did you ever come across Gangaji?
No, I didn't. I haven't. A number of others are not coming to me in this moment. I mean, I studied, I really like caught into learning more like Tibetan Buddhism and Dzogchen style and Mahamudra and some like Adyashanti and like more like tantric perspective, not like neo tantra sex parties, but like actual
Traditional
classic
Tantra.
like traditional tantra. Yeah, which I really love. I love a lot of the philosophy of tantra and like the idea that it's one of the first places I found where they said, like regular people waking up, living normal lives, having families and integrating with society, and it's available to everyone. And there's no specialness to it. It's the first time I saw that as like, this is an integrated part of culture and life. And that
It's a
was
beautiful
huge.
message.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And it's also, we have conditioned belief systems that seem to filter it out, actually. But it turns out to be true.
Yeah. Remembering, I think you were speaking, there was a point where you mentioned the Heart Sutra in your talk. And that kind of special moment at the end of the Heart Sutra where it says like gone beyond.
Altogether beyond.
Oh, yeah.
Rejoice. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an aspect, there's like that like into the beyond is indescribable and it's like undifferentiated, like formless beyond there's beyond knowing, beyond describing, beyond beingness.
Beyond the division of nothingness and everythingness.
Yeah.
I think like sometimes I get questions that suggest that there's this idea that like there's a stage called non-dual or no self, or there's a stage that's just absolute formlessness. But it's really here right now. Like it is really here right now. And so the stage is something actually that filters, that makes it seem like there's solidity and source and, you know,
Yeah.
all of it. That just is like seen through, it's just seen through suddenly. And it's like, oh my God, wow, you know? Um,
Yeah, exactly.
mm,
There's like it can become a stage in the like relative timeline of a human's life where there is a particular perspective tried on, and then another one is tried on, and now we have formed stages, and we have this
yeah.
idea, and like, and that's all concept based and memory based and
Hmm.
based in thought.
Hmm.
But in and of itself, as a thing, as a stage, it's
Mm.
always present. And it's we try to talk about these things and give them words, but they're indescribable. But it's also kind of like the elephant in the room, right? Like
Hmm.
most of the time it's just that like thing that's actually taking up more space than anything else. We're just
Yeah.
not looking at it. It's like
Yeah.
it seems like we spend most of our life like staring at the corner
Mm.
and not just like turning around to see like what's all here, already
Mm.
here all the time.
Mm. Yeah.
Like it's like a door analogy, right? Like people, trying to get through the door, trying to get through the door. And then one day you finally just get exhausted, give up, turn around, slide down the door, crying, and look up and realize you're on the inside of the room already. Like you're
Yeah.
already there. You
Yeah.
just like go the wrong way.
I love that you bring in the pointer of paradox. That's a big one for me as well, because because it is. Uh it's, and there's even the paradox that it's also not a paradox. That's the funny thing about it. It's just so simple. Um but yeah, I wanted to make that point that what we're talking about is really here for anyone listening already. Like it's definitely already in your experience. It's already there. You're looking right at it right
Yeah.
now.
Well,
You know?
one of the pointers that I really loved, I think it was Locke Kelly who said this. Oftentimes this gets overlooked because the way that it's described to us
Hmm.
is so pure, right? We're trying to point at the thing as clearly as possible. And when we hear it being described, it sounds like people are having this like huge miraculous experience all the time. Um, but it's like it's not always that way. Like it's there, and thoughts are there, and sensory experiences there. Like all of this sensory stuff that we're used to paying attention to
Hmm.
in the senses, in the thoughts. It's not like that. Just, I mean, it can
Hmm.
completely, and
Yeah.
but if you go, okay, like that doesn't all have to disappear to
Hmm.
notice this,
Yeah,
to
that's right.
notice what's here all the time
Mm,
with all of
yes.
that interspersed as not separate from.
Hmm.
And any one of these phenomena can be a doorway. It's kind of like, it's so funny because
Right?
it's like actually it's all door. Like there's
Yeah,
no
that's
walls.
it.
Like it's
Yes.
all, and they're all open. They're all
Yeah.
actually open if you know that. Like if you like
Yes.
haven't built up like a little like belief system that like creates like doors and shuts them
Yeah.
essentially.
It's like
Because
looking
that's
portal after portal, like looking here and going, no, 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 nope, it's not that. It's not that. It's not that. Just looking into all these portals to infinity. And all of a sudden the no stops. Like that's it. And it doesn't matter what portal you're looking into. It's like, whoa, shit. And
yeah,
then you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it. Um,
yeah.
mm,
It's like, who
mm,
said it? Ram Dass. Ram Dass, there's a really great documentary about Ram Dass. There's a couple of them. I think it's in the one called Becoming Nobody.
mm,
He's recounting giving these talks, and people would show up, and he'd talk about his, experience with, waking up and LSD and all these things. And one of these days, he's talking, and this woman shows up who, he says looks like, a Nancy Reagan clone. And she's sitting in the audience just looking so square and so, like very, very not the kind of people that would show up to
Yeah.
his talks.
A bit
And
conspicuous.
very he is smiling and nodding, and she is just into it. Everything he says, she kind of enthusiastically is like, yes, yes, and he's noticing this and going, what? Like this lady, really? And so she hangs out afterwards and comes to say hi. And he says, I noticed you like smiling and nodding, like you really understand all these things I'm talking about. And he says, how? Like, how do you know about this? And she says, oh, I know. I crochet.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Her
Yeah.
doorway is
Yeah.
crocheting.
Beautiful.
Yeah. There's there's no limit, there's no
Yeah.
limit to what you can, what you can bring awareness to.
Yeah.
And find a doorway there.
Yeah. It reminds me of, there's a beautiful video of Thich Nhat sitting there with a cup of tea, describing the tea. He's describing the heat and so forth, but it's so obvious what he's doing right there. It's like, I think people probably look and go, oh, this is a silly old Zen guy who, has a cool experience with tea. It's like, no, listen to what he's saying. He's pointing you to it, right? Like, it's so cool. He's turns the cup slowly in his hand and you can see it, the bliss in his face. Like he knows, he knows that what he's saying really can transmit, but it's just a matter of timing. Anyway, the warmth of the tea, the sensation of your feet on the floor, your hand running through your hair when you wash your hair. It's like, it's right there.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem to me, though, that there are maybe personality oriented doorways that are easier for some people than others. And over time, I've kind of noticed that I've kind of tested that theory over and over again, to see for my own system, but also for others. And through that time, it seems like there are kind of orientations that people with different life experiences are going to have a little bit of an easier time going one direction than the other. And so, it might be turning, going deep in or, or out, for example, just those simple turnarounds can make a world of difference. And sometimes, we obsessively follow a teacher, just hoping and get so attached and identified with a particular path. And again, if you don't have a teacher that says, hey, if this isn't working for you, like check out some other stuff, or also, do this, but also that, try, when there's not that openness, then it's really easy to miss what's, what is actually easy. Because I don't think this has to be hard. It doesn't have to be
not
difficult.
hard.
It doesn't have to take a long time.
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, so what you're saying is so simple and accessible. It's also very nuanced. I just want to point this out again for viewers. What you're saying is actually very, very nuanced, and the way I'm picking it up, and that is what you're pointing out to me is the tremendous importance of no self-realization when it comes to transmission. So there's a transmission that all transmission is, in one way of speaking, is that if you're near somebody who's moving through this, who's shifting or waking up, they may be fixated inward or outward, but because you're not, you can empathize with that person, the transmission will help them give themselves permission to move past their own identity structure. And that shift from inward to outward, or outward to inward, or sound to sensation, or heartbreak to whatever, like that is in them. It's their innate knowledge, but your transmission is just you're giving them permission to kind of circumvent their identity structure for a moment, and that's where the breakout happens in a way. So that's what I picked up from you, just trying to put it back into words. but it's a very powerful pointing, actually, what you said there. And it's true. And that's why, like, I usually, like, if people come to me and they ask for a one-on-one teacher sort of thing, I don't point them to anyone unless they've had no self-realization. That's my personal, like, standard with it, because it matters. It actually matters. Like, it really, really does. Because without that, whether you know it or not, you're going to be coming from some kind of paradigm. You just will. You'll, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we should wrap up now, but maybe another time we can have a conversation about shadow work, because it's a whole other thing, very important. But we didn't really go deep into it, but I'm sure you have a lot of really good insights about it.
Yeah, that would be super fun.
Hmm.
I'm down. Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, do you have any like website resource or anything you want to direct people to in case they're interested in contacting you? We certainly don't have to put that in.
Um, I will give you some stuff to put into the links below.
Cool.
Send that over.
Okay.
Save
All right.
that for later. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much. I was looking forward to this, but I purposely didn't want to know that much about you because we met in such a simple way. I thought, we'll just let it come out in the video. I'm more than delighted by how it went, and very powerful medicine, actually. I can just feel it coming very powerfully. It's really cool. Yeah, and I know it's going to benefit a lot of people. So thank you for taking the time.
Wow. Thank you so much, Angelo. It's such an honor to be here with you and share this time together.
Hmm. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.